Well, Matt, I know among other things, because of the many conversations we've had, that you love college football, and therefore you love matchups like this. So we'll get it revved up. That's why we've got you here. One aspect of this that is very interesting to see as we lead off the conversation is that Miller Moss is replacing a legend. Guy won a Heisman Trophy. Oh, Garrett Nussmeier's in that same situation, replacing Jaden Daniels at LSU. So basically, the burden or the opportunity, however you want to phrase it, with Garrett Nussmeier trying to replace Superman, and how you think he's taking that on right now.
Yeah, the parallels between these two teams are pretty incredible. Replacing Heisman Trophy winners, new defensive coordinators. I mean, it really is pretty remarkable how similar that this fell with the two teams opening up. Garrett Nussmeier is kind of an oddity in college football today, because guys that are that highly touted don't sit and wait until their fourth year to play. And it's interesting because you have Carson Beck at Georgia who waited, and you have Garrett Nussmeier at LSU who waited his turn. The bugaboo with Garrett throughout the young part of his career was the arm talent's there. He's the son of a coach. He's got all the intangibles, great team guy, everything. He was just careless with the football. If anyone has the time or the tolerance, you can go back and watch an LSU game against Southern a couple of years ago in Tiger Stadium, where Garrett got in late and he threw one of the most heinous pick sixes you'll ever see in your life. So the real interesting thing was going to be if Garrett can kind of grow out of that and protect the football. And I understand spring is spring and it's a small sample size. And then he did start the bowl game. And again, small sample size. But I think you really saw the growth and progression. If Garrett can protect the football and get his playmakers involved, this offense, it's not going to be what it was a year ago. I mean, guys, they led the country in scoring and total offense. Again, they would literally have to be the best offense in college football. So I don't think they're going to be that, but they're going to be plenty good enough to win any game they play if Garrett protects the football.
And I didn't make that parallel to the extent that I could have, because, we got two of these quarterbacks and I outlined those similarities. But yes, they both had outstanding bowl game performances in lighting up pretty good defenses as well. So I'll turn it over to Tim and Matt because they have much to ask you about, Matt.
So, Matt, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you. We talked about the new defensive coordinators, and we talked about prolific offenses, right? So that's something that they've got down. Had some issues. Both sides had issues on defense last year. USC has brought in Danton Lynn. You guys have Blake Baker coming off that really good run with Missouri. What have you seen? Right away? We got some shocks with Danton Lynn. We got a lot. What's giving you the most confidence with Baker coming onto the scene?
Well, maybe there's not a large sample size, right? So Blake was at LSU for a season before Brian Kelly was hired. When Brian Kelly was hired, he didn't retain Blake Baker. And now 2 years later, he's hired him back as his defensive coordinator. But I think internally they would tell you that Blake needed that experience at Missouri to go be a defensive coordinator in the SEC. And I mean, you talk about parallels, guys, it's interesting because the defense he inherited at Missouri was triple digits in total defense. They were in the 118, 116, all the major categories. And in year one, he brought him into the top 40. So I think the hope here from an optimist standpoint is that there's a similar turnaround. I think Blake is really relatable. He's a young guy. He's an oddity in coaching in that he actually wears cleats to practice, and he'll get in the drills and run around. I don't know that he's got the horses that LSU is used to having. It's going to take some time to get that back. But guys, no matter what, there's just no excuse for an LSU defense to ever be as bad as they were a year ago. They were statistically, guys, literally the worst defense in LSU history. And there was enough talent. I mean, you had 3 defensive linemen drafted off that team. You had talent. And I'm not saying you should have been a top 10, top 20, top 30 defense. But to be 106th in total defense, 118th in pass or whatever it was, that's unacceptable. So long way of answering your question, for Blake Baker, it really is just be competent and maximize the talent you have and be good enough to complement a really good offense. I don't think this defense needs to be a top 20 defense for LSU to have a chance to be a playoff team. They just need to not be the worst defense in program history. And I think that's the expectation for Blake in year one.
I think the parallels are eerily similar between the two programs on that as well.
You know, we saw D'Anton Lynn as well. I mean, look, when he was the DC there at UCLA when LSU opened up in the Rose Bowl in 2021. So it's odd for two teams, you know, in different conferences, different parts of the country to have this many similarities and crossovers. But I mean, it is kind of like that Spider-Man vibe where like they're looking at each other and pointing. Like that's kind of what LSU and USC are going into this game.
So, Matt, Mark made reference to the quarterbacks. And, of course, you know, Garrett Nussmeier can't be like Jaden Daniels. You know, he has to be himself. Miller Moss, he's not going to be like Caleb Williams. He has to be himself. And there's an obvious thought process, philosophy that because these guys aren't super duper stars, they're not proven quarterbacks the way their predecessors were and are, that the way to approach this week one game is ball control, short passes, keep it simple, high percentage, put them in positions to succeed and not overextend them, not overload them. Don't expect them to be the hero. But on the other hand, both of these teams had secondaries, which were Swiss cheese last year. And so there's a thought process that the matchups to hunt when these teams have the ball, it's throwing vertically. So how do you think Brian Kelly and his staff are going to balance safety and percentage plays versus aggression and vertical shots with Garrett Nussmeier?
Yeah, well, if you look at LSU's roster, the single biggest strength, and this is not even debatable in any conversation, is the offensive line. They returned 4 starters. The tackles, look at any mock draft, and you will see Will Campbell, LSU's left tackle, as a top 10 pick. And you'll see Emory Jones, the right tackle, as a first-round pick, somewhere probably in the 20s or teens. Your 2 starting guards, Garrett Dellinger is going to be a 4-year starter, and Miles Frazier, who transferred in a couple of years ago from FIU, who was a freshman All-American at Florida International. He's now started for 3 years at LSU. They are experienced and talented and all that stuff. So if you're not putting yourself in position to succeed behind that offensive line, that's just silly. Now, so I do expect that they will try to run the ball and play around the line of scrimmage and play to the strengths of that line. Now, LSU's got a bunch of game breakers on the outside, which we can talk about. The other interesting thing, guys, is, and this is one difference with SC and LSU, obviously, the SC is still Lincoln Riley's offense. I mean, the conductor of the train is still there. LSU is replacing Mike Denbrock. So Mike Denbrock was the OC who was a Broyles finalist and is a super experienced play caller that Brian Kelly hired when he got the LSU job. They'd worked together at Notre Dame, but Denbrock was the OC of that Cincinnati team, if you remember, with Desmond Ritter that played Georgia in that Peach Bowl. And Denbrock was awesome. Well, Denbrock's gone back to Notre Dame now. And so Joe Sloan, who was the quarterback's coach, has been promoted to OC. So there is a little bit of an unknown there as far as what this offense is going to look like with Joe Sloan. Now, he did call plays in the bowl game, but, you know, I think that is an unknown, and that could be a benefit for LSU, that there'll be a little bit of an element of you're not sure how Sloan will conduct a game. But there's also the flip side of that, which is when you haven't called 100, 200 games, you know, there probably is that experience and growth factor throughout that as well.
Tim.
I'm sorry, I'm pulling the chat. Matt, go ahead. I'm sorry, I've got 2 things going on once.
All right. So, Matt, you know, here at USC, one of the things we've certainly been struggling with in the offseason has been landing defensive tackles in the portal. And I know LSU had some similar struggles. So, like, you know, at USC, our conversation is,
dude, we are the spider. We're just pointing at each other. We're looking the same in the mirror.
That's right. That's right. So what are people saying at LSU about the notion of, you know, we shouldn't overpay, or we need to overpay? Like, you know, if you have a position of need or an acute weakness, like you need to do more, go harder for those transfer portal prospects. Like, how is the LSU community handling the same debate that we're having here at USC pretty much every week at the Voice of College Football?
Well, I think there's got to be a degree of realism. So I know Brian Kelly's comments a couple of weeks ago, you know, caught fire when he said, we're not in the business of buying players. The disappointing thing about that, the reaction to that, I should say, is that Brian Kelly, like, I mean, you guys know this, when you're an interviewer what you would really love are thoughtful answers with context and candor. And Brian Kelly had about a 3.5 minute back and forth about that whole topic, but all anybody latched onto was that one phrase. I mean, guys, LSU has the number one player in the country for 2025 committed. He's a quarterback, Bryce Underwood, out of Michigan. Listen, Gumbo and Etouffee are awesome, and I think Southern women are beautiful, but Bryce Underwood didn't commit to LSU because of Gumbo and Southern women, okay? Like, LSU has a lot to offer. They've had 2 Heisman Trophy winners since 2019, and there's a lot to offer. But you're naive if you don't think NIL is part of that. So, of course, LSU is involved in NIL. They're certainly not as wealthy as some other places are, you know, with the coffers that like an Ohio State or Ole Miss has even shown of late. But, you know, the way Brian Kelly is going about building this roster, you know, we'll see if it works. But since the day he showed up on campus, his approach has been, we're going to build and develop through the high school ranks, and we'll supplement in the transfer portal. And so they're not just going to go. I'll give you just a very descriptive answer. So the player that he was talking about, a defensive lineman, was Dominic Williams from TCU. And Dominic Williams, had they landed him, would have been immediately the most experienced and veteran defensive tackle that they would have had. But Dominic Williams had a 7-figure ask of the LSU collective. That would have been more than double the highest paid player on LSU's team right now. And I just told you they got Will Campbell on the team, who's a projected top 10 pick and has started every game at left tackle since he was game 1 of true freshman season. That's what Brian Kelly was alluding to. And I don't know if that strategy is going to work. Guys, maybe the old strategy of, hey, we're going to lose 25 guys, sign 24, and go spend $15, $17 million. Maybe that's the strategy that's going to work in the NIL era, especially in a 12-team playoff. That's another variable we don't know. So I think on one hand, LSU fans are a little apprehensive because it's very obvious there are programs that have more money and are spending more money. But the other part of it, too, is I think you can respect what Brian Kelly is trying to build. It's just a matter of, will it work this way? And, you know, this is year 3, and he's had back-to-back 10-win seasons. And it'll be a pretty interesting telltale if they're able to take that next stair step and, you know, get to 10, 11 wins in the regular season and get into a 12-team playoff. But I think that's the natural progression everybody's looking for. But, you know, what he inherited was a mess, guys, and he has turned the program around rapidly and put them in position to compete. So while yes, there's some trepidation, I think there's also the flip side of it, which is excitement over what he's built and some buy-in because the results have been there.
So we've heard a little about the offensive line, but if LSU is going to beat USC offensively, where do you think that they'll have the best matchup? Where do you think that LSU has the advantage?
Well, candidly, I can't say I know the USC roster as well as you guys do. But I will tell you, outside of LSU's offensive line, the position group that this would probably surprise people, but they've got a bunch of freak shows at receiver again. And y'all remember a decade ago, like LSU was a quarterback graveyard. Like they literally didn't even throw the ball. It was just this constant point of frustration to see guys that LSU would pump into the NFL at receiver that they just didn't utilize under Les Miles. But if it was Odell and Jarvis to, you know, Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson and now Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors, like LSU has just had this pipeline of dudes they've pumped into the league, and they've got the next crop of them ready to roll. I mean, I don't need to rattle off a bunch of names, but I mean, just know Kyron Lacey. He wears number 2. He thought about going to the draft last year. He'll come back, and he's a dude that's every bit a number 1 first-round pick talent. He was just overshadowed by 2 dudes that, you know, went in the first round last year. But Kyron Lacey's a guy that I would be really surprised if SC fans didn't get to know a lot on September 1.
Matt, for as loaded as that wide receiver room is, we are accustomed to the LSU running back room being just as loaded. And it's been about 3 or 4 years since they've had the kind of dudes that we're used to seeing. And it really doesn't appear, please correct me if I'm wrong, as though they're going to have that kind of back this year.
So they're very thin. It was so interesting. Last year in fall camp, they had 8 scholarship running backs. And so Brian Kelly kept getting peppered with this question, like, what are you going to do with 8 running backs? And his response was always, well, eventually, it sorts itself out. And it did. But of those 8, 4 now are gone because John Emery decided to return. I don't know if y'all noticed, but if y'all saw that he had it looked like he was going to commit to UCLA as a transfer. And just over the weekend announced he's coming back to LSU. Well, the name that everyone here is very excited about is Caleb Jackson. So he's a kid from Baton Rouge. He was a high 4-star. And if you go look up a highlight, guys, there was a play against Mississippi State last year where he just dump trucked a kid on the sideline. And it was one of those viral clips. He looks kind of like the back you're describing. He looks like Fournette or Jeremy Hill or one of those guys that's the big 230-pound guy that has great foot speed but can also run you over. He looks the part. I think a lot of people here are very excited to see him get 200 carries this year to see what that looks like. Josh Williams is back for a 6th season. Josh probably isn't an NFL running back, guys. He's just a really good college football player. Started his career as a walk-on and has just become a very valued piece. I mean, he does everything. He can pass protect. He can run. He can catch the ball. Like he's not going to be on anybody's all-American, all-conference list, but he's just a really, really good college football player. And then they got a freshman coming in, Caden Durham, who's a blue chip from Duncanville, Texas, and people are really excited about him, but he'll probably have to wait his turn, especially if Caleb Jackson has the type of season most expect. But Mark, you're right. I mean, they're thin, and there's not a lot of big time experience in that running back room. There's some talent for sure, but experience, skins on the wall, that's what they lack for certain this year.
All right, Matt, another parallel USC and LSU conversations, very similar this offseason. One of the conversations at USC on the defensive side of the ball, what has to be fixed first? Obviously, everything needs to be fixed because the defense was just so horrible last year at both places. So at USC, we've been having the conversation. How much of it is scheme? How much of it is culture? How much of it is not having the dudes? So I just present that to you. How much of fixing this mess is scheme? How much of it is culture? How much of it is having better dudes?
Well, I don't think it's culture because I think they've built a good culture and you have buy-in. I think last year you had this awful confluence of circumstance where you definitely did not like. It's so odd to say this at a place like LSU, which kind of became known as DBU, kind of in that conversation with Florida and Ohio State, whatever. I mean, I don't really care. I'm not trying to have that argument, but you know the list of names that they've pumped into the NFL at that position. And guys, there wasn't a single draftable player in LSU secondary. So you got to have an increase in talent. Now they hit the portal and they got some freshmen coming in, and we'll see how much that closes that gap, from a year ago. But another big part of it too was the scheme, where I don't think Matt House, who was the defensive coordinator a year ago, who's a smart guy and has had success, I just don't think he related to his players and communicated his defensive concepts well enough, and they certainly didn't adjust. So, yes, the dudes is part of it. But even with the players LSU had, that's still no excuse to be as bad as they were. And guys, it wasn't just like it was SEC games. I mean, we saw Grambling out of the SWAC in week 2 toasting LSU. There's no excuse ever for it. So that's where you can say, look, I don't care how good the kid from Grambling is. He's not better than the kid in purple and gold. And when you're getting beat by 15 yards, you're not where you're supposed to be. Like you don't have to know X's and O's and be able to diagram defense to go, that ain't right. So that's where I think the hope is. Blake Baker coming in can close that gap a little bit.
Spider-Man meme just continues, doesn't it, Matt? It's just amazing. Everything you're saying, I'm just like, yeah, I know. Yeah, I know.
Episode.
One more parallel between these two programs, Matt, special teams. Brian Kelly's special teams, so many struggles. You mentioned, LSU's inability to win openers. There was that infamous blunder against Florida State in the Superdome. And USC, Lincoln Riley doesn't have a special teams coordinator. He's tried to wing it. He's tried to do coach by committee. No, he's got fallen splat on his face. What's the sense of Brian Kelly being able to fix or at least stabilize LSU special teams so it's at least patched up and it can weather the storm this year?
Well, it's going to be one of those things that until I see it, it's going to be hard to believe that they've actually fixed it. So one of the coaches they brought in this year, Slade Nagel, he'll be the tight ends coach and he'll coach special teams again, but he's not a dedicated special teams coordinator. And Slade's got a long history coaching special teams. Back to when Brian Kelly was hired, guys, like if you went position by position on his staff, I think he upgraded everywhere except two spots. One is what we just talked about with Corey Raymond, where he brought in Robert Steeples, and the other was special teams. Greg McMahon was the special teams coordinator who was awesome. I mean, he spent a lifetime in the NFL coaching the Saints, and LSU was one of the best special teams programs in America under Greg McMahon when Ed Ogeron was the coach. And Kelly brought in Brian Polian and, again, kind of had him wing it a little bit. Special teams coordinator, recruiting coordinator, a little of this, a little of that, and it was a disaster. They just brought in a punter out of the portal. They have actually been consistent with Damian Ramos as their place kicker. If we end up seeing a close game on September the 1st, I'd feel comfortable with Ramos, lining up to kick. He's not the one that missed the kick 2 years ago against Florida State in the Dome, but the PAT. But Ramos is a guy I think they have a lot of confidence in. They brought in Xavion Thomas from Mississippi State out of the portal. He's a New Orleans kid who's a receiver. Is also probably going to return kicks and punts. I mean, you can tell there's a lot of trepidation. It's they can give me a lot of answers. They can tell me they like where they are, but it really is you got to see it to believe it type thing.
That resignation in your voice, we've had that at USC the past few years under Lincoln Riley.
Guys, 2 years ago when LSU opened up against Florida State in the Superdome, Malik Neighbors, who was just the fifth pick of the draft, Malik Neighbors, he muffed 2 punts in the Dome and then never returned another punt. And it's flabbergasting, as dynamic and electric and amazing as we all saw that guy is, the 5th pick of the draft. And you couldn't work with him enough just to get him to catch the ball. and so instead, you're losing 40 yards of field position because you don't have guys that can field a punt. And so, man, it's been tough the last 2 years to watch special teams. Yes, it has.
We can relate.
It's been a while since SC's played LSU. They're both the home and away way back when I was like a little kid. But there was that thing that happened in 2003.
Yeah.
And so we can't really invent a rivalry because there's not much of one, right? The two teams haven't played each other.
Right.
But both sides, you say 2003, and right away, both sides just get up for that situation. What is the fever like down there? Has it been talked about at all recently, or is it maybe just in my mind that there's going to be some, not amongst the players because they have no idea what happened in 2003, but amongst the fan base, and the media, is it something that's brewing? Is it a conversation that you've heard at all?
I think as we get closer, we'll start to hear it. And guys, look, so I was that was my senior year at LSU. So I love that 03 LSU team. And, senior at LSU, Matty Moe over here was fully invested in that conversation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There were a lot of pickup trucks around Baton Rouge with FUSC bumper stickers for a long time here. There's probably still some rolling around. But I think time passes and that stuff sort of moves on. The point that I've always made is, and the system is what it is. It was the BCS, LSU on the BCS championship. But if the shoe were on the other foot and LSU didn't get an opportunity to play in the game and had won the AP title, you better believe LSU fans would claim the AP title as well. And it just speaks to what the system was and all the imperfections in it and how we've moved more toward a better system. I still don't think it's perfect, but 4 was better than 2, and I think 12 is better than 4. And I don't know that we're done expanding it either. But I think we will absolutely get a lot of those retrospectives as we get closer to the game. And I think it'll be really fun to look back at both of those teams, which I know both fan bases hold very dear, to their hearts, because for LSU guys, that was the first title in 45 years. And for a lot of fans, they came and went without ever seeing it. And for people like me who grew up watching LSU struggle, you thought that was like forbidden fruit. It was something that could never happen. So, for that team to win it, I've been fortunate enough to be at all the LSU national championship, except for 1958. I wasn't alive. But that was a really special one to be at. And I don't know, man. I still remember the White House when both SC and LSU went. And then President Bush said, why we got a big lawn right here? Why don't we get some pads and play it out here? It was a pretty good moment. So more than anything, I think I look forward to any opportunity to look back at that 2003 team, because they were pretty awesome.
I think we can all agree, whether you root for USC or LSU, or most notably probably college football fans that are unbiased that didn't root for either one, but wanted to see that game play, that we can all agree that would have been the game to watch. Of course, the Oklahoma LSU game, if you just pick up a box score or don't look at the box score, just look at the final score, it looked like a close game, but it was not a close game.
Man, that LSU defense was something, man. Golly, when Marcus Spears had the pick six to start the second half and LSU went up 14, I pulled a cigar out of my pocket and was like waving it around, because I just knew that defense wasn't blowing a 14-point lead. It was a different day, different era of college football, obviously, but that defense wasn't giving up a 14-point lead to anybody. That was obviously Nick Saban, his first title, and boy, there was NFL talent all over that field. They were fun to watch. I wish that defense played at LSU a year ago. They'd have another national title.
I wouldn't mind a 2000 defense at USC right now as well. So I hear you. Believe me.
All right. Love the breakdown with Matt. And it's kind of fun to break down a football game and know that it's less than 3 months away.
Just want to say, Andouille, Andouille, Andouille.
Good sausage.
Well,
Mr. Moscona said, got to be able to spell andouille. So there you go.
Our buddy Adam's dropping by. Adam, we so much appreciate you being here. It almost wouldn't be a show without you. LSU will beat us. It's ridiculous that we have such difficult schedules over the next few years, traveling across the country multiple times and hosting top 10 teams. Fulton, Colin should be ashamed.
Adam, buddy, first, thanks for the super chat. But second, Jen Cohen did not make this schedule. She wasn't here.
Yeah.
This game was scheduled years in advance. I mean, at least, if you want to blame someone, blame Mike Bone, okay? So like Jen Cohen, like she inherited this. And the Big Ten, Jen Cohen inherited that. Like she can't stop the train. And if you want to blame someone, it should be Carol Folt. A little bit also Mike Bone. Jen Cohen has nothing to do with this. Nothing she could have done to prevent it. So
we should not be blaming
that one to bed. Need to put that one to bed.
We should not be blaming anybody. This is who USC plays. It's our DNA. When earlier I kind of bit my tongue, we don't play FCS schools, and we've always got it. We played Notre Dame every year except for 3 years. A couple in World War II and COVID. We played Notre Dame every single year. We've always played the best. We played, like we're talking about LSU, we played them. There's not many teams USC hasn't played in true home and homes. So it's not time for us to start saying, oh, we're only USC. We can't play SEC teams. What are we thinking? We're crazy here. No, this is who USC was made to play. And it is only a one-score game. And I'll tell you what, that's because everyone in Las Vegas watched last year and doesn't think USC can tie its shoes on defense. I think Matt made a couple of points that give me a little bit of optimism that I didn't have before. I've been saying, I'm on record saying we're going to win this game. I just do. I really believe in this defense. And we know that the offense is going to be solid. When Matt told me that the secondary, there's, not the same athletes they're used to having, I started thinking about our receiving core guys. Jacoby Lane, you ever heard of Zachariah Branch? There's going to be some feasting possibly going on. I'm not saying it's going to happen, You know, obviously it's LSU. They're going to have talent. You know, when you have an LSU fan saying their secondary has had to drop down, that doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's not, you know, what we've probably seen in the past.
Just in terms of what Mr. Moscona said, I'm calling him Mr. Moscona because he's Matt, I'm Matt, so I just like differentiating the Matts here. The thing that Mr. Moscona said that concerns me is that he said LSU's strongest unit, offensive line. So like that reaffirms for me that the big position group matchup in this game is LSU's offensive line against USC's defensive line. And the Trojans don't have to win that matchup, but they need to draw. They need to be even. If USC can be even in that matchup, I give the Trojans a good chance. But obviously, if LSU's offensive line wins that matchup decisively, hard to see a path for the Trojans. And then we would need to put up 40. I briefly saw in the chat Gary from Dana Point saying he's getting more nervous. I think he heard what I heard as well. Oh, that LSU offensive line is really good. So like that's my overwhelming main front and center thought in terms of, you know, what USC really has to be able to hold up under, you know, the strain. Just play to a tie against LSU's offensive line.
Most of those guys were freshmen on that LSU offensive line when they lined up against Florida State in the Superdome a few years ago, and they have played a lot of football since then.